The galaxy was dying. For thousands of years, the Celestian hegemony had ruled as the undisputed power, a vast interstellar empire spanning countless systems. But like all great empires before it, entropy had set in. Corruption festered at its core, innovation stagnated, and rebellion spread like wildfire. What had once been a beacon of order and civilization was now a crumbling colossus, teetering on the edge of oblivion. The last true bastion of the hegemony, the capital world of Orpheus Prime, stood under siege. Warships of a dozen species, long oppressed and subjugated, now filled the void, their weapons trained on the palace spires of the Celestian elite. The once mighty Celestians, their luminous forms dimming, had no allies left. None except humanity. A fleet of Terran warships hung in low orbit, their ominous black hulls absorbing light, giving them the eerie appearance of void-born specters. Unlike the chaotic assortment of rebel ships, the human vessels were arranged with cold precision, their massive spinal cannons primed but silent. They were not here as conquerors, nor as rebels. They were here to decide the fate of the galaxy. At the heart of the fleet, aboard the UHS Resolute, Grand Admiral Elias Kane studied the tactical holomap. His weathered face, lined with experience, remained unreadable as he observed the final gasps of an empire that had once looked down on his species as little more than upstart primitives. "The Celestians are finished," muttered Commander Lin Wei, standing at his side. "And everyone down there knows it." Elias exhaled, folding his arms. "That's why we're here. If the rebels win without us, the galaxy collapses into chaos. The old galactic order is dead, something will take its place. The only question is whether it will be better or worse." Lin frowned. "And what are we offering? A new empire?" "No," Elias said firmly. "A rebirth." At that moment, the comms officer spoke up. "Sir, we're receiving a direct transmission from the Celestian High Council. They request immediate audience." Elias exchanged a look with Lin before nodding. "Put them through." The holographic display flickered, revealing the diminished Celestian Chancellor, once a towering, radiant being, now barely glowing. His voice trembled, but there was still arrogance beneath it. "Human," the Chancellor spat, as if the word itself was an insult. "We have been allies. You have fought at our side. Surely you will not abandon us to these savages?" Elias' face remained impassive. "You call them savages, but I see them as people tired of oppression." The Chancellor's glow flickered dangerously. "Without us, the galaxy will burn. Without our order, without our wisdom. Without your rule," Elias interrupted. "Without your chains." He leaned forward. "The humans will not prop up your empire any longer." The Chancellor's expression twisted with fury. "Then you side with the rabble?" Elias shook his head. "No. We stand for something greater than revenge or conquest." He turned to the comms officer. "Open a channel to the rebel coalition." The officer hesitated for only a second before executing the order. The image of the Celestian Chancellor faded, replaced by a fragmented view of multiple rebel leaders, various species, some old enemies of humanity, some barely known to them. Their faces bore the exhaustion of war, but their eyes burned with hope. Elias let the silence stretch before he spoke. "The Celestian hegemony is over," he stated. "Humanity will not replace it. But we will not let chaos consume the stars either." A grizzled reptilian warlord, General Koran of the Dralthar, growled. "Then what do you propose, human?" Elias took a deep breath. This was the moment. A new order. Not an empire. Not a tyranny. But something better. A union where every species has a voice. Where no empire rules with an iron fist. Where technology and knowledge are shared freely. A true rebirth of civilization. The channel fell into stunned silence. And then the arguments began. Some called him naive. Others called him mad. Some, like Koran, saw potential. But Elias had expected resistance. Nothing great was built overnight. And so, as Orpheus Prime burned in the void, the first whispers of a new era began. The Galactic Rebirth had begun. The conference hall aboard the UHS Resolute was packed with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. Some were grizzled warlords, their battle-scarred armor a testament to years of brutal fighting. Others were diplomats, their robes and insignias relics of long-forgotten governments. Many were former slaves and refugees, species that had suffered under Celestian rule for centuries. The air was thick with tension. Elias Kane stood at the center, facing the most volatile collection of leaders in galactic history. He knew this was as dangerous as any battle. If he failed here, the galaxy would fracture, and 1,000 petty wars would take the place of the hegemony. A Draldar warrior, General Koran, was the first to speak. His voice was a deep, guttural growl. You speak of unity, human, but what does that mean? You ask us to trust each other when trust died a long time ago. A Zalari ambassador, an insectoid being with shimmering emerald wings, clicked in agreement. The hegemony kept us in chains for generations. Now you want us to form another government? Another structure that will inevitably favor the strong? Elias met their gazes. No, he said. This isn't about replacing the Celestians with a new ruling class. This is about creating something different. A holographic map appeared above the table, displaying the shattered remains of the hegemony. Hundreds of systems were now unclaimed, their governments in ruins. The collapse of the Celestians leaves a power vacuum, Elias continued. We all know what happens next. War. Conquest. Chaos. He let the silence stretch. We're here to stop that. A representative of the Kvari, a reptilian species with slit-pupiled eyes, hissed. And why should we trust you, human? The Celestians favored you above all others. Perhaps you seek to replace them. Elias exhaled. He had been expecting this. Humanity doesn't want an empire, he said. We don't want to rule. He leaned forward. But we also won't let the galaxy tear itself apart. A tense murmur spread through the room. Some nodded. Others looked unconvinced. Then, from the far end of the table, a deep voice spoke. If you don't want to rule, what do you want? All eyes turned to the speaker, an aged Avanti elder, her silver-feathered head tilted in curiosity. The Avanti had suffered greatly under Celestian rule, their culture nearly erased. Elias took a breath. We want a council, he said. A galactic accord. No single species in control. No absolute ruler. Just a system where every species has a voice. The hall erupted into noise. Some laughed bitterly. Others argued among themselves. Elias let them shout. Let them vent their frustrations. Then he raised a hand. Enough, he said, his voice cutting through the clamor. We have two choices. We can either fight until the stars run red, or we can try something new. His gaze swept the room. I won't force anyone. If you want to return to war, so be it. But humanity won't let the innocent suffer while the powerful squabble. Silence. Then, slowly, General Koran grunted. I'll hear more. The Zalari ambassador hesitated, then nodded. One by one, others followed. Not all. Not yet. But enough. Elias knew this was only the beginning. The war was over. Now, the real battle had begun. The Galactic Accord was barely a week old, and already, cracks were forming. A temporary council had been established on Orion Station, a neutral human outpost in the Terminus sector. Representatives from every major species, those who had agreed to the accord, gathered there, attempting to draft the framework for a new galactic order. But distrust ran deep. Old wounds did not heal overnight, and not everyone present had truly embraced the idea of unity. Grand Admiral Elias Kane watched the proceedings from a balcony overlooking the central hall. The tension in the room was palpable. General Koran of the Draldar bared his fangs at the Zalari ambassador. A Kvari noble accused a former Celestian governor of war crimes. Every discussion seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. "This is a powder keg," Lin Wei muttered beside him. "One wrong word, and it all explodes." Elias nodded. "That's exactly what someone wants." Because while the Accord had its supporters, it also had enemies, powerful ones. The Celestian remnant, those loyalists who had fled Orpheus Prime, had vanished into deep space. Intelligence reports suggested they were regrouping in the Veil Nebula, but no one knew their true strength. Meanwhile, warlords and crime syndicates were seizing unclaimed Celestian worlds, building their own fiefdoms in the lawless regions. And then there were the whispers. Assassins moving in the dark. Supply convoys disappearing. Secret transmissions intercepted, speaking of a force that wanted the Accord dead before it could truly begin. Elias turned to Lin. "What's the latest on the missing diplomats?" Lin's expression darkened. 3 more vanished last night. 1 Kvari, 2 Zalari. No distress signals. No wreckage. Elias clenched his jaw. "It's starting." A sudden explosion rocked Orion Station. Alarms blared. Red emergency lights flared to life. The chamber below erupted into chaos as representatives scrambled for cover. Elias and Lin sprinted toward the central hall as station security forces rushed in. Smoke and fire billowed from the west wing, exactly where the Zalari delegation had been staying. Koran emerged from the smoke, dragging a wounded Zalari official with him. "They hit our quarters first," he growled. This was an assassination attempt. Elias helped the wounded Zalari to a medic. "Who attacked you?" Koran's slit-pupiled eyes burned with fury. "They wore Celestian armor." Lin swore under her breath. "The Remnant." Elias exhaled. "No," he said, his mind racing. "Someone wants us to think that." The Celestian Remnant had the most to lose from the Accord's success, but this attack had been too obvious, too well-timed. The real enemy was still in the shadows. And they had just made their first move. The attack on Orion Station had failed to kill the Accord, but it had come dangerously close. Trust, already fragile, was now hanging by a thread. Accusations flew in every direction. Some believed the Celestian Remnant was behind the strike, others suspected a rogue faction within the Accord itself. Elias Kane knew one thing for certain: whoever was responsible wanted war. And he was going to find them. ####The hunt begins. Aboard the UHS Resolute, Elias stood in the command center, studying a star map littered with red-marked systems, locations of recent disappearances, intercepted transmissions, and sightings of unidentified warships. "The attack was just the beginning," said Lin Wei, arms crossed. "We've had reports of entire convoys vanishing without a trace. Some near Celestian space, others deep in unclaimed territory." Elias frowned. "No distress signals?" Lin shook her head. "None. Just silence." The reports painted a terrifying picture: something was hunting ships in the void. And whoever they were cleaning up their tracks too well. Then, a transmission came through. "This is Captain Doran Vale of the Kvari frigate Stormfang," a gruff voice crackled over the comms. "We found something. Coordinates incoming. Bring a fleet." The transmission cut out. ###the derelict graveyard. 3 hours later, the Resolute and a small task force of warships arrived at the coordinates in deep space. The sight before them sent a chill through the entire crew. A graveyard of ships drifted in the void. Hundreds of vessels, Celestian, Rebel, and neutral traders, hung lifeless, their hulls breached and scorched. No signs of life. No energy readings. Just silence. Elias clenched his jaw. What the hell happened here? The Stormfang floated nearby, its hull scarred from battle. Elias and Lin boarded it, finding Captain Vale waiting for them, a burly, battle-worn Kvari, his scales a deep shade of crimson. Vale gestured to a holographic projection of the wreckage. This isn't piracy. Pirates loot. Whoever did this took nothing, just slaughtered the crews and left the ships to rot. Lin leaned in, eyes scanning the projection. Then what's their objective? Vale hesitated. We sent a probe inside one of the ships. You need to see this for yourself. #### the nightmare within. Elias, Lin, and a team of Marines boarded one of the derelict Celestian cruisers. The ship's interior was a tomb, lifeless corridors, blood smeared along the walls, signs of struggle, but no bodies. Then they reached the bridge. And they found the message. Scrawled across the bulkhead in what looked like melted metal was a single phrase in multiple languages. The old gods return. Elias stared at the words, unease crawling up his spine. What the hell does that mean? Before anyone could answer, the ship's systems flickered to life. Emergency lights. A power surge. And then a voice, distorted, inhuman, echoed through the ship's speakers. You are not ready. The lights cut out, and something moved in the darkness. Darkness swallowed the derelict Celestian cruiser as the ship's emergency lights flickered and died. Elias Kane gripped his rifle tighter. The Marines around him shifted uneasily, their armored suits humming as they activated night vision visors. The words burned into the bulkhead, **** the old gods return ****, still lingered in his mind, but now, something far worse lurked in the shadows. A deep, mechanical whisper echoed through the ship. You are not ready. Then the screaming started. #### the horror unleashed. The first Marine never had a chance. One moment he was scanning the hallway, the next, something moved too fast to track. A wet, sickening crunch filled the air as his body was ripped backward into the darkness. Contact, shouted Lin Wei, raising her rifle. The team opened fire, bright muzzle flashes illuminating the corridor in brief, violent bursts. For a split second, Elias caught a glimpse of the thing that had taken their man, something tall, impossibly thin, its form shifting between the physical and something less real. A grotesque fusion of organic and machine, its metal limbs bent at unnatural angles, eyes glowing like burning coals. And then it was gone. The gunfire stopped. The corridor was empty again. What the hell was that? Captain Vale growled, stepping forward. Elias forced himself to stay calm. Not Celestian. Not anything I've seen before. He turned to Lin. We're leaving. Now. She nodded, already signaling the shuttle. But before they could move, the ship trembled, and a new sound filled the air, a low, rhythmic hum, like a machine coming to life after eons of slumber. The ship wasn't just waking up. It was calling something. #### the lost enemy. Back aboard the UHS Resolute, the team barely had time to recover before the sensors flared. Sir, the comms officer shouted. Unidentified ships inbound. Large fleet, appearing out of nowhere. Elias turned to the viewport, watching as the void itself seemed to tear open. The fleet that emerged did not belong to any known species. The ships were angular and jagged, their hulls shimmering like liquid metal. They moved in eerie synchronization, almost too precise, like they were all controlled by a single mind. Scan them, Elias ordered. The tech's hands shook over the console. I don't understand, sir. No life signs. No power readings. It's like they aren't really there. Then, as one, the ships turned toward the Resolute. A new transmission crackled through the bridge, deep and hollow. The forgotten war is not over. Then the enemy opened fire. #### the battle for survival. The first salvo hit like a tidal wave. Energy beams carved through the smaller escort ships, tearing them apart before they could even react. The Resolute shuddered as its shields flared under the assault. Return fire. Elias barked. The human warships retaliated, their railguns and plasma cannons lancing out at the unknown fleet. Some enemy ships shattered like glass, but others simply reformed, shifting and twisting as if they were alive. "This isn't a battle we can win," Lynn said, gripping the edge of the console. Elias knew she was right. "All ships, emergency jump. Get us the hell out of here." As the Resolute's engines roared to life, Elias took one last look at the enemy. Whoever they were, they had been waiting. Watching. And now, they were here. The emergency jump threw the fleet into chaos. The UHS Resolute lurched violently as the fabric of space tore open, pulling the ship and its crew across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. For a moment, Elias could do nothing but brace himself against the console, heart racing, as the strain of the jump rattled his bones. The bright lights flickered, then stabilized. When the ship finally dropped out of FTL, they were no longer in the deep void of the Terminus sector. Instead, they found themselves in a dense nebula, a swirling vortex of dust and gas. The stars were distant pinpricks of light through the haze. Elias stood at the center of the command deck, silent, staring out into the swirling nebula. "They followed us," Lynn said quietly, her voice edged with disbelief. "How could they follow us?" Elias's mind was already working overtime. Those ships, they weren't just ship star. They were something more. The way they moved, the way they reformed, like living entities. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just an enemy. They were a force. An ancient one. "Sir," came a voice from the tech station. "We've lost contact with the rest of the fleet. We're alone." Elias turned to the officer. "What?" "The rest of our fleet," the officer repeated. "They didn't make the jump. They're gone." A shiver ran down Elias's spine. They were alone. In the deepest reaches of space, surrounded by an enemy they didn't understand. And the enemy was getting closer. ###a dying galaxy. On the Resolute, the fleet's surviving leaders convened in the briefing room. Grand Admiral Kane sat at the head of the table, flanked by Lynn and Captain Vale. Across from them sat the various representatives of the Galactic Accord. It had been their last hope, an effort to unite the galaxy, to stop the chaos and destruction. Now, it seemed the galaxy had no future at all. "We need to face the truth," Elias said, his voice steady but grave. "This enemy is real. And they've been watching us, probably for centuries. We are nothing more than ants in the path of something ancient and unstoppable." General Coran was the first to speak. "I've fought for many things in my life, human. But this," he shook his head, voice heavy with doubt. "How do we fight something that isn't even alive in the way we understand?" Lynn took a breath. "What if we don't fight them? What if there's another way?" Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, her voice quiet. "But we've seen how they move, how they adapt. It's almost like they're waiting for something. Us." She met Elias's gaze. "Maybe it's not about fighting. Maybe it's about understanding them, communicating." Vale snorted. "That's insane. You think these things are going to sit down for tea and discuss peace?" Lynn didn't flinch. "I'm just saying we can't rule anything out." Elias's thoughts raced. 1,000 possibilities flickered in his mind, each one more terrifying than the last. The way the ships had reformed. The whispers in the derelict ship. The words, "The forgotten war is not over." Could it be possible that this wasn't an invasion at all, but a reckoning? "You're right," he said, his voice more determined than ever. "We can't let fear guide us." He turned back to the others. "We need to know everything we can about them. All their weaknesses, their history. We need answers before they find us again. We need to prepare for war, but also for a chance at survival." ###the warning. But as Elias was about to issue the next order, the ship's sensors flared again. A deep, resonant hum pulsed through the hull. He turned to the officer at the station. "What is it?" A chill ran through the officer's voice as they spoke. Sir, it's them. They've found us. A pulse of energy streaked through the nebula, and a massive silhouette emerged from the clouds of dust. The same enemy ships, but this time, they were more, many more star. A whole fleet, closing in on their position. And then, from the deep silence of space, the voice echoed once again. The time has come. The reckoning will begin. The message was clear. And there was no escaping it. The enemy fleet loomed over them, a towering shadow that seemed to swallow the stars themselves. The strange, angular ships formed a perfect blockade, their metal surfaces reflecting the flickering lights of distant galaxies like an army of sentinels awaiting a command. The UHS Resolute was outnumbered, its weapons system strained after the jump and the previous battle. Elias Kane stood on the bridge, hands clenched into fists, staring at the incoming enemy with cold determination. The survivors of the Galactic Accord, the last remnants of a once hopeful alliance, stood behind him. "This is it," Lynn said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No more running." "Prepare to engage," Elias said, his tone flat. He turned to Captain Vale, who nodded grimly. "We can't win this," Vale admitted. "But we can survive. I've got one last plan." Elias raised an eyebrow. "What plan?" Vale's gaze was steady. "We break their formation, make them think we're more than we are, just long enough to get the message out. If we can hit their command ship, we might be able to sever their control. If they're as linked as we think, they'll fall apart." Lynn's eyes narrowed. "And if it doesn't work?" "Then we die," Vale replied. Elias nodded. There was no other option. He had seen enough of this war to know when it was time to fight, and when it was time to face the inevitable. But this was their last chance. The fight for tomorrow. As the enemy fleet drew closer, the crew of the Resolute sprang into action. The remaining ships of the Accord formed a defensive perimeter, their weapon systems powered up and shields reinforced. But they all knew this wouldn't be enough. The first salvo struck hard, splintering the shields of the Resolute and sending the ship into a violent roll. Elias gripped the rail as the ship groaned under the assault. Around him, the crew was in full motion, coordinating counterattacks, launching fighters, and preparing for the worst. Now, Elias shouted. The Resolute broke away from the main battle, heading straight toward the heart of the enemy formation. The enemy responded immediately, sending several ships to intercept. But Elias was counting on the enemy's arrogance, their overconfidence in their own power. They thought the Accord was finished, that no one would dare challenge them. They were wrong. As the Resolute approached the enemy's flagship, a massive vessel covered in shifting, organic metallic plating, Elias gave the order to fire everything they had. The railguns roared to life, striking the flagship's hull in a series of violent, thunderous blasts. For a moment, the enemy faltered. And that was enough. The hidden truth. As the Resolute tore through the enemy defenses, Elias and Lynn boarded a fighter to make a final assault on the flagship's command deck. The air was thick with adrenaline, and the sharp, acrid scent of ionized plasma filled the cockpit. "Remember," Elias said as they neared the flagship, "we only have one shot at this." Lynn nodded. "If this works, we might just survive. If not, we'll take them down as hard as we can." With a sudden burst of speed, they broke through the flagship's defenses, dodging fire and weaving between the enemy vessels. As they got closer, the true scale of the ship became apparent. It was not just a warship, it was a massive, living fortress, powered by an ancient, biomechanical energy source that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. The fighters' weapons flared to life, firing relentlessly at the command tower. Then, the unthinkable happened, the ship's shields failed. A single clean shot hit the central core of the flagship. The pulse of energy that erupted from it was unlike anything Elias had seen, a shockwave of light and sound that rippled through space, momentarily blinding the entire fleet. The flagship reeled. "They're not controlling it," Lynn whispered, her voice heavy with realization. "It's not a fleet. It's a weapon. In that instant, everything fell into place. The old gods weren't gods, they were an ancient race, their ships, their technology, all connected by a collective consciousness, designed for one purpose, destruction. And now, they had awoken. As the flagship shuddered and crumbled, the remaining enemy ships faltered. The hive mind that bound them together had fractured, and with it, their invincible unity. #### The Reckoning. Elias and Lynn raced back to the Resolute just as the enemy fleet scattered. Some ships began to vanish into the void, their forms disintegrating like shadows at dawn. Others turned and fled, no longer able to maintain their coordinated attack. The tide had turned. The battle was over. But the war was far from finished. Humanity had done the impossible. They had faced down an ancient force, one that had nearly erased all civilizations before them. And they had survived. But as the smoke cleared and the stars returned to their peaceful silence, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that this victory had only bought them time. The forgotten war was not over, it had merely paused. The true fight for the future of the galaxy was only just beginning. But for now, humanity stood firm. And that was enough.